Sarah Mitchell had always been practical about love. At 28, working as a nurse at Metropolitan Hospital, she had seen enough drama in the emergency room to last a lifetime. She preferred quiet moments, simple pleasures, and honest people. That's exactly what she found in David Chen, the night janitor who worked the same late shifts she did. David was different from the other men Sarah had dated. He didn't drive a fancy car or wear expensive clothes. His hands were calloused from years of hard work, and he carried himself with a quiet dignity that impressed her more than any flashy gesture could. While other janitors might rush through their duties, David took pride in his work. He knew every corner of the hospital, every nurse by name, and somehow always appeared when someone needed help. Their first conversation happened on a cold Tuesday night in November. Sarah was having a particularly difficult shift. 3 emergency cases had come in back-to-back and she was exhausted. She sat in the break room at 3 in the morning, staring at a cup of cold coffee and wondering if she had chosen the right career. David knocked softly on the break room door. "Excuse me, Miss Mitchell, I saw the light on. Are you okay?" Sarah looked up, surprised. Most of the cleaning staff avoided talking to the medical personnel unless absolutely necessary. "I'm fine, just tired, long night. Would you like some fresh coffee? I just made a pot in the staff kitchen." David's voice was gentle, with a slight accent she couldn't quite place. That simple offer of coffee turned into an hour-long conversation. David listened as Sarah talked about her patients, her worries, and her dreams of maybe traveling someday. He shared stories about his own family, how he had immigrated to America 5 years ago, and how he was saving money to bring his elderly mother over from Taiwan. What struck Sarah most was how David spoke about his work. He didn't seem embarrassed or apologetic about being a janitor. Instead, he talked about keeping the hospital clean as a vital service, how his attention to detail might prevent infections, and how a clean environment helped patients heal faster. He had a perspective that made Sarah see her own work differently, too. Over the following weeks, their late-night conversations became a regular occurrence. David would time his cleaning of the break room to coincide with Sarah's breaks. They talked about everything from books they had read to places they dreamed of visiting. Sarah discovered that David was incredibly well-read, spoke 4 languages fluently, and had an encyclopedic knowledge of world history. "How do you know so much about everything?" Sarah asked one night, genuinely curious. David smiled mysteriously. "I've had an interesting life before coming here. Books have always been my companions, no matter where I was." Sarah's friends at the hospital began to notice her improved mood. Her colleague Jennifer, another nurse, cornered her one day during their shift change. "Okay, spill it. Who is he?" Jennifer demanded with a grin. "Who is who?" Sarah tried to play innocent. "The guy who's making you smile all the time. You've been practically glowing for weeks." Sarah hesitated. She knew her friends would probably think she was crazy for being interested in a janitor. Most of them were dating doctors, lawyers, or other professionals. But something about David made her feel more understood than she had ever felt before. "His name is David. He works here at the hospital." "A doctor? Which department?" "He's in maintenance. The night shift." Jennifer's expression changed slightly. "Oh, well, that's nice." That lukewarm response was exactly what Sarah had expected. But as weeks turned into months, she found herself looking forward to work, just to see David. Their friendship deepened into something more meaningful. David had a way of making her feel important, not because of her job or her achievements, but simply because of who she was as a person. One evening in spring, David surprised her with a small potted plant for her apartment windowsill. "I noticed you mentioned wanting to start a garden someday. This seemed like a good beginning." The gesture was so thoughtful, so perfectly suited to her personality, that Sarah felt her heart skip. She realized she was falling in love with this quiet, humble man who cleaned floors for a living and somehow made her feel like the most important person in the world. David asked her out officially in May. Not to an expensive restaurant or a fancy show, but to a small bookstore cafe where they could browse books together and talk for hours over simple sandwiches. It was perfect. Sarah's family had mixed reactions when she finally introduced David. Her practical mother appreciated his politeness and work ethic, but her father seemed disappointed that his daughter wasn't dating someone with more prestigious career prospects. Her younger sister Emma was more direct. "Sarah, he seems really nice, but are you sure about this? I mean, what kind of future can you have with a janitor?" "The kind where I'm happy," Sarah replied firmly. "David treats me better than any man I've ever known. He's kind, intelligent, hardworking, and he makes me laugh. What more could I want?" But privately, Sarah did sometimes wonder about their future together. She made decent money as a nurse, but she had student loans and wanted to eventually buy a house, maybe have children. David's salary was modest, and while he was clearly frugal and responsible with money, she worried about whether they could build the life she had always imagined. David seemed to sense her occasional concerns. One night, as they walked through the city park after dinner, he took her hand and said, "Sarah, I know people probably think I'm not good enough for you. Maybe they're right about some things, but I want you to know that every day I'm working to build a better life for us. I have some savings, and I'm looking into opportunities to advance my career. I won't always be just a janitor." The sincerity in his voice, the way he squeezed her hand, the quiet determination in his eyes, all of it convinced Sarah that whatever challenges they might face, they would face them together. She was falling deeper in love with David Chen, and for the first time in her life, she was ready to follow her heart instead of just her practical mind. What she didn't know was that David's mysterious past held secrets that would change everything. She thought she knew about the man she was learning to love. 8 months into their relationship, David proposed to Sarah in the hospital garden where they had shared so many quiet conversations during break times. It wasn't a grand gesture with photographers or a crowd of people. Instead, it was intimate and personal, exactly what Sarah had always dreamed of without realizing it. They sat on their favorite bench under the old oak tree, sharing a thermos of tea that David had brought. The night was unusually warm for October, and the city seemed quieter than usual around them. "Sarah," David began, his voice slightly nervous. "Before I met you, I thought my life was just about surviving each day, making enough money, keeping my head down. You changed everything for me." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a simple but beautiful ring. Not expensive, but clearly chosen, with care. "I know I can't give you everything you deserve right now, but I promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of your love. Will you marry me?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she said yes. The ring fit perfectly, and later she would learn that David had quietly asked her friend Jennifer about her ring size months earlier, planning this moment carefully. They decided on a small wedding. David had no family in America except for a few distant cousins, and Sarah's family, while supportive, seemed to prefer keeping the celebration modest. The ceremony took place in a small community center with about 30 guests, mostly Sarah's family and friends from the hospital. David looked handsome in a simple dark suit that Sarah suspected he had saved for months to buy. During their vows, he spoke about honor, loyalty, and protection in a way that seemed to come from deep personal experience. Sarah noticed several people in the audience seemed moved by the sincerity of his words. "I promise to protect you, to stand by your side through any challenge, and to love you with the same dedication I have given to everything important in my life," David said, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. After the wedding, they moved into a small apartment together. Sarah was surprised by how efficiently David had lived before their marriage. His previous apartment had been tiny but impeccably organized. Every item had its place, and everything was maintained in perfect condition. His few possessions were high quality and well cared for, suggesting someone who valued functionality over quantity. Married life revealed new aspects of David's character that both impressed and puzzled Sarah. He woke up every morning at 5 o'clock sharp, even on his days off, and did a series of exercises that looked more advanced than typical fitness routines. When Sarah asked about it, he simply said he had always maintained good physical condition. David's cooking skills were another surprise. He could prepare elaborate meals with whatever ingredients were available, and he seemed to know techniques from cuisines around the world. When Sarah complimented his lamb dish one evening, David mentioned he had learned to cook from people he had worked with in different places. "What kind of work did you do before coming to America?" Sarah asked, realizing she had never gotten a complete answer to this question. Government work, David replied simply. Nothing very interesting. Paperwork mostly. Sarah accepted this explanation, though something about David's tone suggested there was more to the story. She had learned that her husband was a private person who revealed information slowly, and she didn't want to push him to share more than he was comfortable with. Their first year of marriage was happy, but not without challenges. Sarah's friends were polite to David, but she could sense their confusion about her choice. At hospital social events, David would be friendly but quiet, listening more than talking. Some people seemed to dismiss him as just Sarah's blue-collar husband, but Sarah noticed that those who actually engaged in conversation with David often walked away looking impressed. Dr. Rodriguez, one of the senior physicians at the hospital, made a point of talking to David at the annual hospital picnic. Later, he pulled Sarah aside. "Your husband is an interesting man, Sarah. We were discussing international politics, and he has insights I wouldn't expect from someone in his position. Has he traveled extensively?" "I think so, but he doesn't talk about it much," Sarah replied. "Honestly? Well, he's clearly very intelligent. You're lucky to have found someone with such depth." These kinds of comments made Sarah increasingly curious about David's past, but she respected his privacy. Everyone had parts of their history they preferred not to discuss, and David had always been completely honest about his current life and future plans. David continued working the night shift at the hospital, but Sarah began to notice changes in his routine. He started receiving occasional phone calls that he would take in another room, speaking in languages she didn't recognize. When she asked about them, he explained they were calls from old friends who had scattered around the world. "I had a job that involved working with international teams," he explained. "We still keep in touch." More puzzling were the packages that occasionally arrived at their apartment. David would accept them personally and store the contents in a locked box in their bedroom closet. When Sarah asked about it, David said they were documents and mementos from his previous work that he needed to keep secure. "Nothing dangerous or illegal," he assured her with a smile. "Just paperwork that I'm required to maintain for a certain number of years. Government bureaucracy." Sarah trusted her husband completely, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there were significant parts of his life she didn't understand. David's explanation always made sense in the moment, but later she would find herself wondering about the details that didn't quite add up. One evening, while David was at work, Sarah was putting away laundry when she accidentally knocked over the locked box from David's closet. The box fell open, spilling some of its contents onto the bedroom floor. As she gathered the papers to put them back, she caught sight of official-looking documents with David's photo and what appeared to be military insignia she didn't recognize. Before she could examine them more closely, she heard David's key in the front door. He was home early from his shift. Sarah quickly gathered the papers and closed the box, her heart racing. She didn't want David to think she was snooping, but the glimpse of those documents raised questions she couldn't ignore. That night, as they lay in bed together, Sarah found herself looking at her husband's face in the moonlight coming through their bedroom window. Who was David Chen, really? And why did she suddenly feel like the man she had married was someone entirely different from the person she thought she knew? The next morning, David seemed more attentive than usual, bringing her coffee in bed and asking about her plans for the day. Sarah wondered if he had somehow sensed that she had seen something she wasn't supposed to see. But David's behavior remained warm and loving, giving her no reason to doubt his devotion to their marriage. Still, as she went to work that day, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about those documents and what they might mean about her husband's mysterious past. 2 years into their marriage, Sarah's curiosity about David's past became impossible to ignore. The incident with the documents had planted seeds of questions that grew stronger with each mysterious phone call and each evasive answer about his previous life. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday evening in March. Sarah had just finished a particularly difficult shift when she received a call from hospital security. There had been an incident in the parking garage and they needed her to come down immediately. When Sarah arrived at the garage, she found a crowd gathered around David, who was kneeling beside a man lying unconscious on the concrete floor. The man appeared to be in his 30s, well-dressed with blood trickling from his nose. Hospital security officers were standing around looking confused and impressed. "What happened?" Sarah asked, rushing to David's side. "This man was following your wife," David explained calmly to the security chief, his hand still checking the unconscious man's pulse with practiced efficiency. "I saw him watching her for several days. Tonight he cornered her near her car and grabbed her arm aggressively." Sarah stared at David in shock. She hadn't even noticed anyone following her, let alone felt threatened. "Following me? I didn't see anyone. He was being careful," David said, his voice carrying an authority Sarah had never heard before. "Professional surveillance techniques, but not careful enough." The security chief, a former police officer named Mike, looked at the unconscious man and then at David with newfound respect. "How exactly did you subdue him?" "Basic self-defense," David replied simply. "He's not seriously injured, just unconscious. He'll wake up in a few minutes." But Sarah could see this was far from basic self-defense. The man on the ground was larger than David, and apparently had been rendered unconscious so quickly and quietly that no one else in the parking garage had even noticed the altercation until it was over. When the police arrived, they found identification, showing the man was a private investigator named Marcus Webb. In his car, they discovered surveillance photos of Sarah, detailed notes about her daily routines, and what appeared to be information about David as well. Detective Lisa Park, who handled the case, asked to speak with David and Sarah privately. "Mr. Chen, I have to say, your response to this situation was remarkably effective. Do you have training in personal security or law enforcement?" "I've had some self-defense training over the years," David answered carefully. Detective Park studied David's face. "The way you subdued Mr. Webb suggests more than casual self-defense classes. And you identified surveillance techniques that most civilians wouldn't recognize." Sarah watched this exchange with growing amazement. Her husband was speaking to the detective with a confidence and knowledge that seemed to come from deep experience with these kinds of situations. "Detective, do you have any idea why someone would be investigating my wife and me?" David asked. "That's what we're trying to determine. Webb isn't talking, and his employer paid him in cash through intermediaries. But his equipment is expensive, and his methods suggest this wasn't a routine infidelity case or insurance fraud investigation." That night, after the police had finished their questions and Webb had been arrested for stalking and assault, Sarah confronted David directly. "David, I need you to tell me the truth. Who are you really?" David sat down heavily on their couch, looking older than Sarah had ever seen him. For a long moment he stared at his hands, and Sarah could see him wrestling with some internal decision. "Sarah, there are parts of my past that I've kept from you, not because I wanted to lie, but because I wanted to protect you from complications that had nothing to do with our life together." "What kind of complications?" David looked up at her, his eyes reflecting a sadness she had never seen before. "Before I came to America, I worked for the Taiwanese military in a specialized unit. We did missions that required traveling to different countries, working with international partners, dealing with situations that most people never know about." "What kind of missions?" "Counterterrorism, rescue operations, intelligence gathering, high-risk situations where people's lives depended on our success." Sarah felt her legs go weak. She sat down across from David, trying to process this information. "You were a soldier?" "More than that. I was a commander in special forces. I led teams on missions across Asia, Africa, and Eastern Europe for 15 years. The room seemed to spin around Sarah, the man she had married, the quiet janitor who cleaned hospital floors and brought her coffee during night shifts, had been a special forces commander. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to leave that life completely behind. When I came to America, I wanted to be just David Chen, a regular person living a normal life. I took the hospital job because I needed work that was simple, honest, and had nothing to do with conflict or danger. But someone is investigating us now. This Webb person, the surveillance, it's connected to your past, isn't it?" David nodded grimly. "I think so. There are people who might want to find me for various reasons. Some might want revenge for missions I completed. Others might want to recruit me back into that world. I had hoped that by keeping a low profile, Living quietly, I could avoid all of that. Sarah's mind raced with questions. The phone calls in different languages, the documents in the box, your exercise routine, the way you cook. It all makes sense now. I never lied to you about who I am now, Sarah. Everything I've shown you about my character, my values, my love for you, that's all completely real. But yes, I have skills and experiences that I hoped never to use again. Are we in danger? David's expression became very serious. I don't know yet, but I promise you this. I will do everything necessary to keep you safe. And now that you know the truth, we can face whatever comes together. Sarah stood up and began pacing around their small living room. Her husband, the man she thought she knew completely, was someone she had never imagined. The implications of this revelation were overwhelming. David, this changes everything. I married a janitor, not a special forces commander. I don't know how to be married to someone with your kind of past. I'm still the same man who loves you, who wants to build a quiet life with you, who brings you coffee and listens to your stories about work, David said softly. My past doesn't change how I feel about you or what I want our future to be. But even as David spoke these words, both of them knew that everything had changed. The investigation, the surveillance, the mysterious aspects of David's behavior, all of it suggested that his past was not as buried as he had hoped. Sarah looked at her husband, seeing him with completely new eyes, and wondered what other secrets the man she loved might be carrying. The weeks following David's revelation were unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Her husband transformed before her eyes from the quiet, humble man she thought she knew into someone who moved through the world with heightened awareness and calculated precision. David quit his job at the hospital immediately, explaining to Sarah that continuing to work there would put other people at risk. Instead, he began making phone calls to contacts from his previous life, speaking in languages Sarah was learning to recognize as Mandarin, Korean, and what sounded like Russian. I'm trying to find out who ordered the surveillance and why, David explained during one of their increasingly serious dinner conversations. Webb, the private investigator, was just hired muscle. Someone with significant resources wanted information about us. Sarah watched her husband during these calls, noting how his posture changed, how his voice became more commanding, how he seemed to slip back into patterns of behavior from his military days. It was like living with two different people in the same body. David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. During your time in Special Forces, did you ever kill anyone? David's chopsticks paused halfway to his mouth. He set them down carefully and looked directly at Sarah. Yes, when it was necessary to complete missions or protect my team. The simple honesty of his answer hit Sarah harder than any elaborate explanation would have. She was married to a man who had taken lives as part of his job. The knowledge sat in her stomach like a stone. How many people? Sarah, that's not a number I keep track of, and it's not something that will help you understand who I am now. What matters is that everything I did was in service of protecting innocent people and preventing larger conflicts. But you're capable of violence. Yes. And that capability is part of what might keep you safe now. 3 days later, David's investigation yielded disturbing results. He came home from a meeting with one of his old contacts looking more serious than Sarah had ever seen him. The surveillance wasn't random, and it wasn't related to anything I did in Special Forces, David said, sitting down across from Sarah at their kitchen table. It's connected to something much more recent. What do you mean? Do you remember 6 months ago when there was that incident at the hospital with the patient who was brought in after a car accident? The one who died, despite everyone's efforts? To save him? Sarah thought back. Mr. Petrov, the businessman? Yes, it was tragic. He had internal injuries that were just too severe. Viktor Petrov wasn't just a businessman, Sarah. He was involved in international money laundering for several criminal organizations. And according to my contact, his death wasn't accidental. Sarah felt her blood turn cold. What are you saying? Someone murdered Viktor Petrov and made it look like a car accident. But before he died, he was conscious long enough to say something to someone at the hospital. The people who killed him think he might have revealed information about their operations. David, I was one of the nurses treating him that night. Are you saying they think I know something? That's exactly what I'm saying. They've been investigating everyone who had contact with Petrov during his final hours, trying to determine if he passed along any information that could expose their activities. Sarah's mind raced back to that night. She remembered Petrov grabbing her hand as she tried to start an IV, remembered him mumbling something in what sounded like Russian or Ukrainian. At the time, she had assumed he was just confused and in pain. He did say something to me, Sarah admitted. I couldn't understand it, and I didn't think it was important. He was dying, David. People say all kinds of things when they're in that condition. Do you remember what he said? It sounded like Zeleny most or something like that. I assumed it was just random words. David's expression became very grave. Zeleny most means Green Bridge in Russian. It's also the name of a bank in Cyprus that's been suspected of laundering money for Eastern European crime families. The implications of this hit Sarah like a physical blow. He was trying to tell me something about their money operations, and now they think you might know details that could destroy their financial network. Sarah, these are people who kill without hesitation. The fact that they've been surveilling you instead of acting directly suggests they're trying to determine exactly what you know before they decide what to do about it. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed next to her husband, staring at the ceiling and trying to process the reality of her situation. She was a target of international criminals because of something a dying man had whispered to her during his final moments. David, what are we going to do? We're going to disappear, David said quietly. I've been making preparations since I learned about the Petrov connection. I have resources, safe houses, people who can help us start new lives somewhere far from here. You want me to abandon my entire life, my job, my family, my friends? I want you to stay alive. These people won't stop, Sarah. They can't afford to let anyone who might know about their operations remain free. What about going to the police? The FBI? With what evidence? A dying man's words that might have been random syllables? By the time law enforcement could investigate and build a case, we'd both be dead. Sarah sat up in bed, her heart pounding. This is insane, David. 2 years ago, I was just a nurse living a normal life. Now I'm married to a former Special Forces commander and being hunted by international criminals because of something I can't even remember clearly. I know how overwhelming this must be. Do you? Because I'm starting to wonder if anything about our relationship has been normal. Did you approach me at the hospital because you somehow knew this might happen? Was our entire courtship part of some plan? The hurt that flashed across David's face was unmistakable. Sarah, everything between us has been real. I took that job at the hospital because I wanted a simple life. I fell in love with you because of who you are, not because of any mission or plan. This situation with Petrov is just terrible timing. But you're prepared for it. You have safe houses and resources and contacts. This isn't the first time you've had to disappear, is it? David was quiet for a long moment. No, it's not. But it's the first time I've had someone I love to protect. The next morning, David began teaching Sarah basic security protocols, how to vary her routes to work, how to identify if she was being followed, how to recognize potential threats. The training was comprehensive and clearly came from years of professional experience. I never wanted you to need this knowledge, David said, as he showed her how to use different exits from buildings to avoid predictable patterns. But now that you do, I'm going to make sure you have every advantage I can give you. As Sarah learned these skills, she began to understand the depth of her husband's expertise. This wasn't just military training. This was the knowledge of someone who had spent years operating in the most dangerous situations imaginable. But even as she appreciated David's efforts to protect her, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her life had become something she never signed up for. She had married a man she thought was simple and straightforward, only to discover that he came with complications she could never have imagined. The question now was whether their love was strong enough to survive not just the immediate danger, but the fundamental changes in how they understood each other in their relationship. The attack came on a quiet Sunday morning while Sarah and David were having breakfast in their apartment. David had just poured Sarah a second cup of coffee when he suddenly froze. His head tilted slightly as if listening to something she couldn't hear. "Get down," David whispered urgently, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her away from the kitchen table. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, but David was already moving her toward their bedroom with swift, silent steps. "There are at least 3 people in the hallway outside our door," David said quietly, opening the bedroom closet and retrieving a black bag Sarah had never seen before. "Professional movement patterns. They're here for us." From the bag, David pulled out what looked like military equipment, a tactical vest, a handgun, and several items Sarah didn't recognize. The transformation from her gentle husband to a trained operative happened in seconds. "Sarah, listen to me very carefully. In 30 seconds, I'm going to create a distraction that will draw them away from the front door. When I do, you're going to go out the fire escape and down to the alley behind the building. There's a blue Honda parked there with the keys hidden in the wheel well. Drive to the address I'm about to give you and wait for me. David, I'm not leaving you alone with armed criminals. You're not leaving me alone. You're following a plan that gives us both the best chance of survival." David's voice carried absolute authority. "Sarah, I've been in situations like this dozens of times. Trust me to know what I'm doing." Before Sarah could argue further, they heard the soft sound of someone picking the lock on their front door. David's expression became completely focused and calm in a way that was both reassuring and frightening. What happened next unfolded so quickly that Sarah could barely process it. David moved through their apartment with precision and silence, using furniture and walls as cover. She heard muffled sounds from the living room, brief, quiet struggles that ended almost as soon as they began. Then David was back at her side, breathing only slightly harder than normal. "2 down, 1 retreating. We need to leave now." As they climbed down the fire escape, Sarah could hear sirens in the distance. Someone had called the police, probably after hearing the brief sounds of the confrontation. "What about the police? Won't they help us?" "These people have resources, Sarah. They probably have contacts in law enforcement. We can't risk trusting anyone right now except each other." The safe house David brought her to was a small cabin, about 2 hours outside the city, hidden in thick woods and accessible only by a winding dirt road. Inside it was stocked with supplies, communication equipment, and enough food for several weeks. "How many places like this do you have?" Sarah asked, looking around at the professional setup. "Enough," David replied. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. The men who came to our apartment today weren't just hired criminals. Based on their equipment and tactics, they were former military, probably European special forces. What does that mean? It means the people hunting us have significant resources and connections. This isn't just about money laundering anymore. Petrov must have known about something much bigger." Over the following days, David worked his network of contacts to gather more information. What he learned was deeply troubling. Viktor Petrov hadn't just been involved in money laundering. He had been the financial coordinator for an international arms trafficking operation that supplied weapons to terrorist organizations and rebel groups around the world. Petrov was skimming money from their operations, David explained during one of their evening conversations. When they discovered his theft, they ordered his assassination. But before he died, he managed to hide evidence of their entire operation, including bank accounts, shipping routes, and client lists. And they think he told me where to find this evidence? That's right. Zeleny Most wasn't just the name of a bank. It was the location where Petrov hid digital files containing everything that could destroy their organization. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had become involved in. "David, I'm just a nurse. I don't know anything about international arms trafficking or hidden evidence. Why can't we just tell them that?" "Because they can't afford to take that risk. If there's even a small chance you know something, they have to eliminate that possibility." "So, what are our options?" David was quiet for a long moment, staring out the cabin window at the dark forest beyond. "We have 3 choices. We can run and spend the rest of our lives hiding. We can find Petrov's evidence and use it to negotiate our safety. Or we can find the evidence and turn it over to the authorities, hoping they can protect us afterward." "What do you think we should do?" "I think we should find the evidence and use it to end this permanently. These people won't stop hunting us as long as they believe we pose a threat. The only way to be truly safe is to make sure they no longer exist as an organization. That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about how dramatically her life had changed. 6 months ago, her biggest worry had been whether she would get the promotion to head nurse. Now she was hiding in a cabin in the woods, married to a former Special Forces commander being hunted by international arms dealers. But as she watched David sleep beside her, she realized something important. Despite everything that had happened, despite all the secrets and revelations, her feelings for him hadn't changed. If anything, seeing him handle these dangerous situations with such competence and dedication to protecting her had deepened her love and respect for him. The next morning, David had news from his contacts. "I think I know where Petrov hid the evidence. There's a safety deposit box at a bank in Montreal registered under a false name. One of my sources believes that's where Petrov stored copies of all the documents." "Montreal? That's in Canada." "Yes, which is good for us. It's far enough from here to make surveillance difficult, and I have contacts in Montreal who can help us." "David, I need to ask you something, and I want a completely honest answer." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Always. When this is over, when we're safe, what happens to us? Do we go back to being a normal married couple, or is this kind of danger always going to be part of our lives?" David sat down beside her on the small cabin couch. "Sarah, I can't promise you that my past will never create complications. There are people in the world who know my real identity and what I'm capable of. Some of them might always see me as either a threat or a potential asset. That's not the answer I was hoping for. But," David continued, taking her hands in his, "I can promise you that I will do everything in my power to build us a safe, quiet life. If we can end this threat permanently, if we can make sure these particular criminals can never hurt anyone, again, then we'll have eliminated the biggest danger we're likely to face. And if we can't, then we'll face whatever comes together. Sarah, you didn't sign up for this when you married me, and I understand if it's too much. If you want to walk away after this is resolved, I'll make sure you have a new identity and enough resources to start over anywhere in the world." Sarah looked into her husband's eyes, seeing the pain behind his offer. "David, I didn't marry you because I thought life would be easy. I married you because I love who you are, all of who you are. That includes the parts of your past that I'm only now learning about. Even if it means living with the possibility of danger? Even then. But I have one condition." "What's that?" "No more secrets. If we're going to face these kinds of situations together, I need to know everything. I need to understand who I'm married to and what kinds of threats we might face." David nodded solemnly. "No more secrets, I promise." Over the next few days, David shared more details about his military career than Sarah had ever imagined. She learned about missions in Afghanistan, Somalia, and Eastern Europe. She heard about teammates he had lost, operations that had gone wrong, and decisions he had made that still haunted him. The hardest part wasn't the physical danger, David explained one evening as they sat by the cabin's fireplace. It was the isolation. You can't have normal relationships when your job requires you to disappear for months at a time, when you can't tell people what you really do for a living, when you're trained to see threats everywhere. Is that why you never married before? Partly, but also because I never met anyone who made me want to try to have a normal life. Until I met you. Sarah began to understand that David's decision to become a hospital janitor hadn't just been about wanting simple work. It had been about choosing a life that was the complete opposite of everything he had known before. Helping instead of fighting, healing instead of destroying, being part of a community instead of operating alone. "The night we first talked in the hospital break room," Sarah said, "you seemed so interested in my work, in how I helped patients. Was that because it was so different from what you had done?" "Yes. Watching you care for people, seeing how much it meant to you to help them heal. It made me believe that I could maybe find a way to do something constructive with my life too." As they prepared to leave for Montreal, Sarah felt a strange sense of clarity about their relationship. Yes, David had kept important secrets from her, and yes, their life together would likely be more complicated than she had originally expected. But the core of who he was, his integrity, his dedication, his capacity for love, remained unchanged. The night we first talked in the hospital break room, Sarah said, "You seemed so interested in my work and how I helped patients. Was that because it was so different from what you had done?" "Yes. Watching you care for people, seeing how much it meant to you to help them heal, it made me believe that I could maybe find a way to do something constructive with my life too." As they prepared to leave for Montreal, Sarah felt a strange sense of clarity about their relationship. Yes, David had kept important secrets from her, and yes, their life together would likely be more complicated than she had originally expected. But the core of who he was, his integrity, his dedication, his capacity for love, remained unchanged. "David, when we get to Montreal and find Petrov's evidence, what exactly are we going to do with it?" "We're going to make sure it reaches the right people in law enforcement, people who can't be bought or intimidated. And then we're going to make sure the criminals who have been hunting us know that their entire operation has been exposed." "Will that really end the threat?" "It should. Once their organization is destroyed and their leaders are arrested or killed, there won't be anyone left with the resources or motivation to come after us." Sarah nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into even greater danger. But as she looked at her husband making preparations for their journey, checking weapons and equipment with professional efficiency, she felt confident that if anyone could successfully navigate this situation, it was David. The man she had fallen in love with as a humble hospital janitor was revealing himself to be someone far more complex and capable than she had ever imagined. And despite everything that had happened, she was beginning to realize that this revelation made her love him, even more, not less. The journey to Montreal took 3 days, with David using routes and methods that seemed designed to confuse anyone who might be following them. They switched cars twice, stayed in different motels each night, and used cash for everything. Sarah watched her husband navigate this complex process with ease, realizing that this level of operational security was second nature to him. On their final night before reaching Montreal, they stayed in a small motel outside the city. David spent hours on secure phone calls, speaking with contacts Sarah now understood were former military colleagues who had built new lives in various countries around the world. "Tomorrow morning, we're going to meet with someone named Elena Volkov," David explained after finishing his calls. "She's a former Russian intelligence officer who now works as a private security consultant. She has connections that can help us access Petrov's safety deposit box legally." "Can we trust her?" "Elena and I worked together on a joint operation about 8 years ago. She saved my life and I saved hers. In our world, that creates bonds that don't break easily." The next morning, they met Elena at a small cafe in Montreal's Old Town. She was a woman in her 40s, elegantly dressed with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her surroundings. When she greeted David, Sarah could see the genuine warmth between them. "David, you look good for someone who's supposed to be dead," Elena said with a slight Russian accent and a knowing smile. "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," David replied. "Elena, this is my wife Sarah." Elena studied Sarah with interest. "So you're the nurse who accidentally became involved in international arms trafficking. You have terrible luck but excellent taste in husbands." "Thank you, I think." Elena's expression became serious. "David, the people hunting you are more dangerous than you know. The organization Petrov was stealing from calls itself the Crimson Network. They have operations on 4 continents and enough firepower to fight small wars. What can you tell us about their current activities? They're desperate to find Petrov's evidence because it doesn't just document their money laundering. It contains details about arms shipments they've been making to terrorist groups in the Middle East and Africa. If that information reaches Western intelligence agencies, it will trigger military responses that could destroy them completely." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "We're not just dealing with criminals. We're dealing with people who supply weapons to terrorists." "Exactly," Elena confirmed, "which is why they will kill anyone who might expose them, no matter how remote the possibility." Elena had arranged for them to access Petrov's safety deposit box through a contact at the bank who owed her a favor. The process took most of the afternoon, involving forged documents and carefully orchestrated timing to avoid security cameras. When they finally opened the box, they found exactly what David had hoped for. Digital storage devices containing thousands of files documenting the Crimson Network's operations, bank records, shipping manifests, client lists, photographs of weapons transfers, and detailed financial records going back 5 years. "This is everything," David said, reviewing the files on Elena's secure laptop. "With this evidence, law enforcement agencies around the world can shut down their entire operation. The question is which agencies we can trust," Elena pointed out. "The Crimson Network has been operating for years. They certainly have contacts within various government organizations." "I know someone," David said thoughtfully. "Colonel James Mitchell, U.S. Army Intelligence. He was my commanding officer during my final mission. He's now working with a joint task force focused on international arms trafficking. Can you trust him completely? With my life, and more importantly, with Sarah's life." That evening, David made contact with Colonel Mitchell, using secure communication methods that Elena provided. The conversation was brief but intense, with David explaining their situation and the evidence they had discovered. "Mitchell wants to meet us tomorrow," David told Sarah and Elena afterward. "He's flying in from Washington with a small team of specialists. If he confirms the evidence is genuine, they can coordinate simultaneous raids on Crimson Network operations around the world. And if the evidence isn't enough, then we'll have to consider other options." The meeting with Colonel Mitchell took place at a secure location outside Montreal. Mitchell was a tall, serious man in his 50s who greeted David with obvious respect and concern. "David, when you disappeared from active duty, we assumed you wanted to start a civilian life. I never expected to hear from you again under these circumstances." "Neither did I, sir. But sometimes the past has a way of catching up." Mitchell reviewed the evidence they had recovered, working with technology specialists who verified its authenticity. After several hours of analysis, he looked up with satisfaction. "This is exceptional intelligence. With this information, we can dismantle the Crimson Network completely. David, you and your wife have potentially saved thousands of lives by preventing future arms shipments to terrorist organizations." "What happens next?" Sarah asked. "We coordinate with law enforcement agencies in 12 countries to conduct simultaneous raids. Within 48 hours, every major figure in the Crimson Network will be either arrested or eliminated. The organization will cease to exist. And our safety? Once the network is destroyed, there won't be anyone left with the resources or motivation to pursue you. You'll be able to return to your normal lives." 2 days later, Sarah and David watched news reports from their Montreal hotel room as coordinated raids took place around the world. Banks were seized, warehouses raided, and dozens of arrests made. The scale of the operation was unprecedented, spanning from Eastern Europe to Southeast Asia to South America. "Is it really over?" Sarah asked as they watched footage of handcuffed suspects being led away by police in various countries. "It's over," David confirmed. "The Crimson Network no longer exists." 3 months later, Sarah and David were back in their home city, living in a new apartment and slowly rebuilding their normal routine. David had found work as a security consultant using his skills in a legal and constructive way. Sarah had returned to nursing, though at a different hospital where she felt safer. "Do you ever regret learning the truth about who I really am?" David asked one evening as they sat together on their new couch. "Never," Sarah replied without hesitation. "I fell in love with the man you chose to become, not the job you used to have. And going through this experience together showed me that our love is strong enough to survive anything." "Even being married to a former Special Forces commander who occasionally gets pulled into international conspiracies?" Sarah laughed. "Especially that. Although I hope the international conspiracy part was a one-time thing. I think we've had our share of excitement for one lifetime." As they settled into their evening routine, Sarah reflected on how much their relationship had changed and grown. She had married a man she thought was a simple hospital janitor, only to discover he was someone far more complex and experienced than she had imagined. But the qualities that had first attracted her to David, his kindness, his integrity, his quiet strength, had remained constant throughout everything they had faced together. The man who cleaned hospital floors with meticulous care was the same man who had protected her from international criminals with deadly efficiency. The husband who brought her coffee during night shifts was the same person who had coordinated with military intelligence to dismantle a global arms trafficking network. David had been right when he told her that his past didn't change who he was in the present. If anything, understanding his background had helped Sarah appreciate the depth of his character and the deliberate choices he had made to build a peaceful, loving life with her. As she fell asleep that night, Sarah smiled to herself, thinking about how she would tell this story to their future children someday. She had married the janitor, not knowing he was a former Special Forces commander. But more importantly, she had married the love of her life, and that was all that really mattered.